This video is going to discuss ethical concerns in animals. So when we're talking about non-human subjects, we still need to consider, our research projects still need to consider the ethics involved. Now, we're not going to spend as much time on this because we're not going to be using animals as our subjects. We're going to be using humans. However, it is equally important. Most of my research was actually in animals. For my master's and my doctorate, I used animal models for all of my research. So I'm very familiar with these ethical considerations. So one thing that comes up often is it even ethical to use animals in research because they can't consent, right? But researchers frequently use non-human subjects because sometimes they're interested in understanding the animals for their own sake. They can generalize what we find in animals to humans. And sometimes the research just isn't possible to be conducted in humans. So the APA has ethical guidelines also for animal research. And that link just took us to these guidelines here. So the guidelines for ethical conduct in the care and use of non-human animals in research. And it goes through and it talks about the justification of the research, personnel, people who should be working with the animal and doing animal research, the care and housing of animals, acquisition of animals, experimental procedures, doing field research. So this is like Jane Goodall going out and observing the animals, educational use of non-human animals. And so all of these guidelines here are there to protect animals when they're used in research, basically. And overall, they include the general care and maintenance of the animals and the housing conditions, food, sanitation, medical care for research animals. So the idea is, you saw in there's a little bit more in those guidelines, but it's not just how you obtain the animals. So when I was working in the lab, we had specific facilities that we would order our rats and mice for, and those were used for laboratory purposes. Then when they came into our facility, we had specific places where we had to house them. We had to get specific permission if we wanted to keep them in the lab. That wasn't allowed because there were vet technicians down in the basement, basically, where we kept the animals, and they had specific airflow considerations. The vet techs made sure that their bedding and everything was taken care of. There were very specific things for the care and maintenance of the animals. And then we had also so one of the models I worked with was a caloric restriction where we gave the animals less food. So we had to mark the cages so that the vet techs wouldn't accidentally feed the animals. We had to get approval to do the caloric restriction, of course, as well. And then things like medical care. So we also did surgery on our animals. So it was important to make sure that they had the proper care after they had these various different surgeries. And there are other societies that protect animal subjects, the SPCA, the U.S. government Principles for the Utilization and Care of Vertebrate Animals, Association for the Laboratory Animal Science, and then there's also an American Association for Accreditation of Laboratory Animal Care. So the governing board that is in different research institutions that considers the ethical considerations for non-human subjects would be the IACUC, or the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. So Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, that's IACUC for short. Like the IRB board stood for the Institutional Review Board. So the goal of the IACUC is to review and approve all institutional research using animal subjects. So in order for us to do our animal research when I was doing my master's and my PhD, we had to submit our proposals to the IACUC before we could even submit the grants that would give us the funding for the research. We had to have very specific, set of guidelines like this is what the research is for, this is what we're going to be doing, this is why we're going to be doing it. And it's not just, oh, okay, you've done this before, it's been done in another laboratory. It's very much, we can't just be repeating the same things over and over again with animals. We need to make sure that we're furthering the science. That the benefits outweigh the risks. And this committee is going to be composed of one veterinarian, one scientist that's experienced with the research on animal subjects, and one member of the general public. So you have the veterinarian to make sure that again, maximizing the benefits while minimizing the risks, making sure the animals are well cared for, housing is clean, all that kinds of stuff. A scientist that understands the animal research, that can see, does this really move forward the field of the research? And then the general public, because most universities are within some sort of community, and that community, if they have a university that's doing animal research, they of course are at risk for people coming out and getting angry about that animal research being done on that campus. So you're going to do a lab, and you're going to come back to these different guidelines. And so basically the idea is you're going to go to a website, and it's going to have a variety of different experiments that were either approved or denied approval for animal research. And then I want you to go through and read the little summary and just look at these different guidelines and see which one was either followed or not followed that allowed it to get approved or denied. And you only have to discuss 2 in your assignment, your lab assignment. So this one is that there's going to be psychologists that are trained in research methods and experienced in the care of laboratory animals that will closely supervise all procedures. B is basically that anybody who is working with animals will have received the proper instructions on how to care and maintain and handle the species that are used. C is the idea that you want to minimize that discomfort, infection, and the pain of animals. And so again, it's like things like using the proper anesthetic, making sure that when we did surgery that the wounds were cleaned properly. D is talking about, if we were subjecting the animals to pain and, doing a surgery is painful, that we only did that if there wasn't an alternative available. And it had to be justified by the scientific or educational value to it. Again, that maximizing the benefits while minimizing those risks. We had to ensure that we were going to do surgical procedures under proper anesthesia. And we had a variety of different things in the lab that we had to, be specific about in order to, again, minimize that pain before and after surgery, avoid infections, things like, shaving the head, using the proper anesthetic dose. We were using ketamine, so we even had to write down the amount because it's a controlled substance. And then if the animal's life was to be terminated, so be euthanized, it had to be done rapidly, the effort to minimize pain. And so then again, there were very specific procedures for that as well. Sometimes anesthesia was used, and sometimes it was not. It depended on the needs of the tissue, I guess. So you're going to be going through, again, they're science fair projects, so we're probably not going to be talking as much about E and F, but maybe some of these first 4 will come into play.